Hello, and welcome to the SciPhi Show.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're back again for another fantastic sci-fi show, or at least we hope. Today we're going to be discussing the statement, is the Kalam valid? You know, if we were to ask you that question, how would you answer? Now, generally there's a group of atheists that would answer yes and a group that would answer no. Why would an atheist agree that the Kalam is valid though? After all, the KCA has apparent problems. And if it is valid, why would another atheist argue that it isn't? Why do atheists disagree on the topic? This stream returns us to somewhat the idea of the language game. You know, we did that Wittgensteinian stream a couple of weeks ago. We're going to discuss why these two groups will disagree with each other and why both groups might be right, but might also be wrong. And if there's time, we might even go into some of the details of the positives and negatives of the Kalam itself. However, that isn't going to be the main focus of the stream. The main focus is going to be the language. Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Luke.
And it's great to have you all here. I know today's mix was a bit of a change of pace. We've been having a lot of drum and bass recently. I thought I might have something a little bit more chilled out. And I put it out to the audience. And there was no decisive winner on what to have. But one person went the extra mile and left a comment saying that they would be really in the mood for trance. So I figured I'm going to count that as an extra vote to tip it over the edge, which just so happened to coincide with what I wanted to do anyway. So I hope you all enjoyed that mix. As I said, I know it's a bit different to what we usually do. It will be separated as part of Plato's Rave for the reruns. I should really get up to doing our, Mixcloud thing, but it's just extra effort that I don't have time for at the moment. Anyway, you're not here to hear me go on about music. Because
yes, they are.
That bit's already happened.
No, they definitely are.
I thought that's what I was here for, anyway.
Well, philosophy is music to your ears. And your soul.
Yeah, you say that. But you've never read Hegel.
There's a reason for that. You didn't come through there, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there must be... Can you hear me?
Yeah. I don't know if your mouse just didn't connect.
Yeah, no,
when
there's
you pressed
like a
the
2-second delay. No, there's like a 2-second delay.
Oh, right. Well, what's a sci-fi stream without a few technical difficulties?
I'll log out and log in again.
You try turning it off and on again.
That's the best thing I can think of.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
Okie dokie.
It literally would just be totally out of character for us.
Yeah, it would.
Every stream, like all the streams I did on my channel went fine. As soon as I started doing something else, for some reason, that's when I started getting technical issues.
And he's back.
And I'm back.
Welcome back.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear us?
And it's in instant response as well.
Excellent. So, anyway, tonight's stream is about the Kalam, except it's not about the Kalam, but it kind of is about the Kalam. And you'll find out why. So, the question, the title of the stream is the Kalam is valid? And the question that we pose is, you know, if we were to say to you, is the Kalam valid? What would you say? And there's two main responses to this. One being yes and one being no. And this is obviously by atheists. I think theists would all say yes. But atheists will say yes or no. And this comes down to certain understandings and certain language games. So, Dave, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, I kind of got the inspiration from a discussion you were in. And it was with somebody on Twitter, and there was like an argument going on between whether it's valid, and one person saying, you don't get to tell me how to use valid in the way I use the word, it's not valid. And so it's kind of a perfect example of the language games that we were discussing just the other week.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I mean, we hear a number of different ways people say it's not valid. For example, some will say it's not sound, so therefore it's not valid. Some will just say, no, it's not valid. Some will say, I don't agree with it, therefore it's not valid. There's a number of different takes on this, and
it's expired, so it's not valid.
It's been debunked, so it's not valid. But when it comes to that side, it's really easy to understand what it means when people say, yes, it is valid. Because the Kalam cosmological argument is a logical argument. It's a syllogism, and it follows the correct form. And if the premises are true, then they entail the conclusion. So the structure is valid. Okay? Now, I actually got into a conversation about this on Twitter when we first put out the coming soon link. And there was a comment that got me thinking. I mean, there was a few on there, but there was a good one on there that I didn't completely agree with the phrasing, but essentially the way the conversation transpired is, there's nothing impressive about a argument being valid, because it just means that it's following the form. It's got nothing to do with it being true or good, or it could be fallacious to a degree and still be valid. And it made me go, thinking about it that way, it could be a good way to explain to people who say, no, it's not valid, that there's nothing wrong with it being valid. It being valid doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it sound.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really giving way in a discussion to say, yes, it is valid. Because, like you say, it doesn't really mean much. The question you should be asked, and this is kind of a mix-up that happens, the question they should be asking is whether or not it's sound.
Exactly.
And that is basically what they mean when they say it's not valid. They're saying it's not sound in that other language game, but using a different word.
Exactly. And in fact, there was a couple of different ways people were chiming in with this thread. And one of them was by, Van Rausler or something like that. And he said, it's like when a guy used to check in his code on our branches, and he said, well, my code compiles. And that's essentially one way to look at it. Your code compiles. It might not work, but it compiles. It compiles, you can publish it, but it doesn't necessarily do the task that you actually mean it to. And if you think about it that way, that's what a valid argument is. So first of all, you have your argument, right? Then you have to see if it's got a valid structure. And if it's got a valid structure, then obviously it's the premises entail the conclusion. And if both premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It's necessarily true. But it doesn't mean that it is. And then you've got sound, when those premises are true, so therefore the conclusion is necessarily true. So that is why the Kalam is valid. But let's explore some of these other reasons that people might say it's not valid.
Well, you've got the one, I don't accept it. I don't think it's true. It doesn't seem to be good reasoning to me. So they're dismissing it as an argument that doesn't compel them to believe it. And that's one way that they're using the thing. It's not valid. And that's a fine argument to make. Do you know what I mean? Because if the question is just, is the Kalam valid? Both of those answers are kind of suitable, really, aren't they? Yes, it's valid, meaning in the logic of the structure of the logic. No, it's not valid, meaning it's and the other thing. And
is your connection having issues tonight, Dave?
Oh no, is it doing it again?
Yeah. You were cutting in and out there, but don't worry.
I'm sorry. I'm in Wales. The sheep can't run all the time. Something about animal cruelty. Yeah, so you can kind of work language game to language game. But the problem is when somebody who's discussing the logic of the argument says, yes, it's valid, jumping in with saying it's not valid is kind of making a muddle, like getting the two arguments wrong and crossing them over.
Yeah, most definitely. It's where you start talking past each other. And I suppose, realistically, you should be trying to play the language game of whoever created the opening statement.
Yes, exactly. And you'll get a lot of atheists and skeptics who will argue you should just ask them their definition and get on with the discussion. But often we see that to only mean them, though.
Yeah.
Rather than the other person's language game. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Ask me what I mean. Your definitions mean nothing to me.
Yeah, my definitions count. Yeah. But that does happen. Do you know what I mean?
It does,
and
yeah.
that's one of the arguments that you get from a lot of skeptics and atheists as well. You don't get to tell me how language works. You don't get to tell me what words mean. And they're kind of correct. There's nothing that can compel them to use the word you're using in the way that you're using it. But there is actually kind of a contextual authority that exists.
It's true. I mean, there are contextually correct definitions. We say this all the time when we use science as an example. If you're a scientist, or having a discussion about science and you're talking about a theory, you're talking about a scientific theory. You're not talking about the colloquial idea. If you're talking about a hypothesis, you're talking about a scientific hypothesis and there's certain baggage that contains. You're not talking about conjecture.
Yeah, I've got a hunch.
Exactly. If you're talking about evolution, unless otherwise specified, you're talking about biological evolution. You're not talking about, just a change. Because evolution can be used colloquial in that. Oh, I've had an evolution of my thoughts, So within science, that you've got this contextually correct terminology, these normative uses, that the things that we ought to be using. And so an argument can be made that if you're discussing a logical argument, you should be using the authority of the logic to discuss it.
There's an interesting point here, I guess, which is that these individuals may think that they're using a contextually accurate or contextually valid word, because in science, and a lot of these people are kind of massive science fanboys, so they get a lot of their language supposedly from science, although they also get that wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But in science, validity is accuracy. It's how are we measuring what we're claiming to measure is essentially the term valid. So when a study is valid, it means that it has accurately measured what is claimed to measure.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, excellent point.
And it shows that if they are using that, they're clearly playing a different language game. I mean, we know they're playing a different language game anyway. But if you say, using scientific language to talk about logic, you're playing
exactly. Yeah. And I came up with an analogy the other day that I shared with you.
And it's brilliant.
Yeah. So if you think about it like this, you have a baseball game going on, and the pitcher throws the ball, and the batter swings and misses, and the umpire catches it and says, "Strike." And a big martial arts guy comes down, walks up to the umpire, because that's what they do, He's like Steven Seagal, Yeah. And he walks up and he strikes the umpire and says, "That's a strike. What you said isn't a strike." They're both kind of right, but there's still a wrong answer to that, because it is a strike in baseball, and that's what they're playing.
Yep. I mean, you can even say the bat strikes the ball,
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not a strike.
in the context that the umpire is yelling it out. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's a great way to show it. We need to find some way to broach these things and try and get people playing the same language game. That it always seems to be a one-way deal. And I don't know another way to describe logical validity without calling it, valid and sound and all of that, outside of the logical language game. How else do you describe it without just saying, well, the conclusion is entailed by the premises? It's like,
yeah. But I mean, that's well-established terminology. So if you're going to discuss that kind of thing, you go to that sort of terminology, don't you? As you pointed out, you would go to in psychology. Yes. And I think that's where a lot of the arguments come in, because it's an example of a discussion happening without any conversation.
Most definitely, yeah. Which happens all too often, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Don't. I'm bitter today, guys, by the way, just in case anyone, if I make comments about internet atheists and how they think they know science and stuff, I'm bitter. So just leave me to it. I'll get over it.
No, you won't.
Why?
Because the second you start to feel better about it, it'll happen 3 more times.
Yeah. We'll probably be saying some stuff that actually triggers it off and causes you to come in screaming and ranting.
We can only hope.
You want a rant? I'll give you a rant. No, I'm just kidding.
I want you to turn your camera on and then we say something that actually gets you frothing at the mouth. Clip, short. There we go.
Here's Luke having a breakdown. Over there. Everyone come and see. 3 cents a ticket.
So we to bring things back on topic, this language game as well, it can be even further confused by someone saying it's not logically valid.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like they think they know what logically valid is. They think they even know the game. They're not even saying, well, no, valid means this. They're saying, well, I know logically valid. That's what you're talking about. I know logically valid. It's not. You're like, well, how is it?
Yeah.
And then they'll bring in certain things like, well, it's got a presupposition in it. Or there's some induction in one of the premises. You're like,
there is no first cause to the universe, so it's false. Yeah.
And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with rejecting the premises. I mean, I think, depending on how you define certain words within it, I will either reject or accept it. Because if we use it as in sort of like our universe in its current state, the Big Bang is the thing that led to its current state, then yeah, you can make a naturalistic argument using the Kalam. You can.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was ever a true nothing in the universe. I think there was always something. So there was never beginning in that regard. And also, when you get to that point where we don't know what happened before a certain point, and actually, what does it mean for something to begin before time if time is a reference to... Well, beginning is a reference to time, and, it gets confusing. It's a very hard concept for us to actually wrap our heads around. But if we use it from the sense that, okay, yeah, we think about the universe, there was pure photon energy in the universe, then quantum fluctuations disrupted the matter-antimatter pairs, and it caused the chain reaction, which led to the Big Bang. There you go, that's our first cause to the universe in its current state. I can accept talking about the Kalam in that way, and I think actually might even conclude if we use that as sound. Now, I know not everybody uses that way.
I actually have a theory just based off what you were just saying.
Oh, yeah.
I think sometimes...
What sort of theory? Is it a scientific theory? I mean,
it's actually a fully formed scientific theory that's had lots of research put into it. Yeah. Okay, this is more of a hypothesis, Joe.
So we can falsify it, can we?
It's not a null hypothesis.
How are we going to operationalize it, Luke?
This could be operationalized, actually. Anyway, I think that... many of the people who say it's not valid not only just say it's not valid because of the fact that they don't understand or they don't know the difference between the use of valid in two different terms, but I think they also don't want to accept a concept which justifies a religious perspective. I think people may agree with each of the premises and then say, no, it's not valid still, just because it has the potential to end up in a god, even though it doesn't. And that's one of the issues, I think, is that it's almost like stubbornness.
Well, another thing that I was thinking is that a lot of the times when people argue, you don't get to tell me how to use a word, there's no authority on how to use a word. I think in many of those cases, it's just that they don't want to, like you said, they don't want to admit to anything that leads to God. But saying the word valid is an almost kind of positive word. Mm-hmm. And it seems like you're saying something positive about religion.
When you think about it, valid is a pretty neutral judgment, really. If you talk about like language, for example, in general, any definition of atheism is valid. They're all valid. Some are better than others, especially, for different reasons. Commonly used it's got a benefit of being quickly and easily understood. The most logical, most clear and concise. There's, that has its benefits, but they're all valid. You could even have ones like we could just start using it to mean someone that picks their nose. It would still be a valid use. It wouldn't be particularly useful. It's pretty... I mean, when it comes to language, basically everything's valid.
It's very fluid. Yeah. And like... Sorry. I was just going to say, with no authority, there's nobody who can say you can't use a word. And you can create a private language between two people.
Yep.
Doesn't seem to be much use except to pass on secrets, but that would be about it.
This is a real big issue that I have, actually, and sorry, I wasn't listening for a little bit because I was moving upstairs, so I've moved. But the whole purpose of language, and I'm sure these language games is like, I don't know what language games like are really, because I haven't watched your stream now. I think you did it, but I haven't watched it yet. Sorry. But the idea is that someone's in playing, like, essentially playing games with words in one way, and then a group of people are using the same.
No, that's not quite what language games mean.
Tell me it is quickly.
Basically, you have a certain framework in which a certain dialogue kind of goes on, and that framework kind of is where the words get their meaning from. And there's different frameworks wherein different words mean different things. So a language game is the same as like any kind of board game where there's a kind of set of rules for that in like 10-second Wittgenstein.
So the idea is that like we'll be playing tennis and then another group will be playing cricket and they'll be trying to compare it.
Yeah, something like that.
They'll be trying to bowl the ball at the tennis player.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
I see
yeah.
what you're saying, right. Yeah, so that's exactly what my point is, really, to be honest. The whole point of language is to be understood and to understand others, right?
Yep.
It's not, and this is actually a point of contention I'm having in the, although I haven't brought it up necessarily in the debate, the discussion I'm having at the moment, is that this guy's referring to his intention when he says something and not considering or not caring about the reaction that somebody might have to that because of their experience, right?
Do you know the funniest thing, like this person before has done the opposite, and I've said a couple of things. I mean, like, you know, there are times when you don't think something through fully unless you're Dave, and I've said a few things and not really thought about the effect that it might have on someone else, and I've said, well, I didn't intend it that way. It was just meant as, you know, a joke. There wasn't any of this sort of undertones here for this thing. It's literally just saying, well, you know, you take it as it is. Why does it matter that, you know, this one person's got offended by it? And he would go on, no, you need to really consider the fact that, you know, this could really upset someone. And does it really affect you if you change your language and use better language, right? So the fact that he is arguing the opposite side to you now is hilarious to me, because I think he was actually right when he was saying, no, think about the impact and think about how much it matters to you. You know?
Yeah, I think he's right as well in that situation, not now.
Yeah, in that situation. And it was right. I mean, it was about something that didn't matter to me. I just thought it was silly for someone to get worked up over something. But the fact of the matter is, it had no impact on my life whatsoever, whether that language was used or not. In fact, it wasn't. It was me commenting on someone else using language and going, "Why does it matter?" So it wasn't even me using the language. It was the Kleenex tissues, man-sized.
Oh, he seems to be a stickler for misogynistic language.
Well, yeah, exactly. So he was actually arguing against it, though. He was saying, no, if it's actually affecting people, it's using man-size as a positive quality. And if it was woman size, it's then saying, you know, it's negative. So if the man size is positive, the woman size is negative, you can understand why women might get offended by this. And really, does it make any difference to you if they actually change the name? I was like, well, no, I just didn't think that there's really much point in making a big hoo-ha about it. And you know what? I still don't think there's much point in making a big hoo-ha about it, but at the same time, it's no skin off of my nose if they change the name of man-sized tissues, and if it does upset someone, fine, change it, right? It's not like it's something like someone telling me to change something about my identity. You know, there's no part of me that is tied to this terminology. So what he's doing with then talking to you about, you know, terms like delusional, crazy, and all of that, his intentions is like, yeah, but I'm not doing it. I'm saying it to mean this thing. It's like, doesn't matter. There's still the impact from people who do not know your intentions, who do suffer with mental illness, that do feel like mental illness is being stigmatized. There are other people who get on the train and actually go, yeah, you know, religion is a mental illness. All religious people are delusional. They're crazy. They're insane, and all of that. And again, it doesn't matter that his intent is not that. They're getting on the train and going, yes, this is right. Yeah, they're delusional. They're mentally ill. And so his intent doesn't actually matter. What matters is the impact. Does it really hurt him to change his language to more sensitive language? And the thing is, right, the language he's using has a far bigger impact on mentally illness than me saying, I don't really see the problem with man-sized tissues.
Wow. Maybe I'll bring that up. I'll be like, how do you feel about man-sized tissues? I love them. Because my sneezes are so big that I need that extra space, right? That's me being honest as well. Anyway, but yeah, I guess. Sorry.
I told you all psychologists did code.
You know what? I sneezed so hard once that it strummed my guitar from the other side of the room. Like my guitar reverberated.
Yeah. I was expecting a shat my pants story, and that's kind of disappointing.
Never quite that. Never quite that. Anyway, but yeah, you know, the whole thing, the whole point of language is to have communication, effective communication, right?
Well,
and I think so. That well, I mean that's his like I guess purpose is a loose term here. It's purpose. It doesn't necessarily have a direct purpose, but we evolved the ability to use language because of that, because it allowed us to communicate more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to see it. And unfortunately, I'm going to bring up some sort of social constructivism view, even though I find it horrible. But thinking from a family therapy perspective, when doing family therapy, you don't address either of the people directly. You're not doing therapy to say it's a husband and a wife. You're not doing therapy to the husband or the wife or the husband and the wife. You're doing therapy to their relationship and the middle ground, and you're essentially trying to and that's the social construct. Is the relationship is the construct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we're talking about language and when we're having discussions with people, we should have that in the back of our heads, that when we're trying to communicate with them, we shouldn't be trying to communicate from just our intention and just our like knowledge and what we believe and stuff. And we shouldn't just be thinking about their side either and just paying lip service to them and stuff. We need to be thinking about, okay, how do I achieve what I want to achieve based on my beliefs? But also, how do I do that in a way that will make them understand where I'm coming from and meet in that middle? And I think that just doesn't happen. It's very much me. This is what my understanding is. This is how I believe it should be and stuff like that. And there's no attempt to kind of go, oh, actually, you know what? Maybe using the term, calling someone batshit crazy because they believe in a sky daddy might be offensive to somebody who actually has a mental illness, you know.
Yeah, or works with people who have mental illnesses.
Well, yeah, and the only reason I get offended is because I see the damage it does to people. I see that people don't come forwards. People feel ashamed about their mental illness because of it.
Yeah,
they feel like they are less than, and they don't want to talk about it, and they won't be open with it because they're scared about how people will see them.
Historically, mental illness was very taboo anyway. I mean, my stepdad in his older age has been dealing with like a lot of anxiety. He's never had any real issues before, but he's been having loads of like panic attacks and things like that. But he refused for such a long time to even admit there was anything wrong. My sister is a little bit OCD. Little bit's an understatement, and he wouldn't let her get the help she wanted when she was younger because he didn't want there to be a black mark against her. You know, there is already a big stigma against mental illness. And people using these terms so glibly really add to that stigma, especially when it seems to be, oh, things are getting better, I can actually talk about this sort of stuff openly now. Oh, and you poke your head up and you're like, hey guys, and then you just have this wash of rah 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 rah, and you're like, a little, you know. But yeah, have you both frozen?
No. I was about to say something.
I think Dave froze, and I was just like, "What's going on?" I thought you might as well because your camera's not on yet.
It is playing up.
Oh dear, Dave.
What? Yeah, no, sorry, I had to cough. I might have smoked a couple of bongs before coming on.
Hey. It's the only way to make the Kalam interesting, isn't it?
Kind of, yes.
I think. Do you guys think as well that I'm just thinking about like other things, not just as mental illness stuff, but just like taking language. I find it really frustrating when people take language and they might look at a definition or they might use their understanding of the word, but they'll manipulate it. They'll. It's almost like they try and shove a square peg into a round hole with the word in order to make it fit their rhetoric or something.
Yeah.
And I find it really frustrating when that happens because and I don't necessarily think it's always dishonest, but it feels dishonest because it's like, well, I can use this word however I want. If I want it to mean this thing, then that's what it will mean. Or like, yeah, it might not be the exact meaning of it, but it's pretty close. Like, especially with yeah, I have to go back to mental health stuff because it's just what's in my head. But like the word delusion, when people are saying it's idiosyncratic belief, which is still held in the face of evidence or something like that, right? And then it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, idiosyncratic specifically means that it's personal to them. It's their own belief.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, well, yeah, but it still fits the definition, even though they're talking about religious people who make up the majority of the world, and it's a culturally sanctioned, like kind of belief to have. And to me, it's just like, so you're just ignoring that part of the definition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because they argue to win. So that's why they'll jump into another kind of language game and bring in their own because they want to win the conversation, not actually have the conversation.
I mean, I said that on the conversation you were having earlier, didn't I, Luke?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to mute that one in the end.
I haven't seen it, thankfully.
Well, you're actually tagged in there at some point. I don't know how. You must have been tagged in the original message or something.
I might have muted it then, because I'm not getting anything through.
Oh,
and it sounds like something I would have mute anyway.
You don't want to see my valiant battle?
But going
Does
back
it
to something
come in the style of a kung fu film?
It can do if you want it to. You just got to use your
well,
imagination.
go off and make the YouTube video of you doing it in kung fu movie form, and I'll pay attention to it.
Do it in the form of Kung Fu Hustle.
I think I'm done.
Oh, yes.
Kung Fu Hustle. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Not Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon then.
No, got to be Kung
It's
Fu
got to have
Hustle.
comedy. Got to be absurdism.
Yeah. But going back to something you said about this sort of trying to, find that middle ground sort of thing. I think sometimes it's quite hard because sometimes this is the contextually correct definition. No, it's not. It's this. But it isn't. I understand, and sometimes you can have the conversation. I can understand how you're using it. You might be using it this way or to mean this. And, colloquial, that is a perfectly valid definition. But within the context of logic or medicine or whatever, this means this. And, you can say, I can understand that you might have pure intents and you don't think that anyone should take offense at this, so on and so forth. You can have all of this conversation and you can try and be finding that middle ground. But it does tend up to say, no, this is it, I'm right. And that then causes you to sort of take a step back and just go, no, you're wrong. You are just wrong.
Yeah.
And then you get to that point where you're both separated. You've tried to make that first bit to try and bring them in and say, I understand your position. But sometimes it's just like...
This is I get really stuck on this specifically with the null hypothesis. It's the one that I really can't. I'm like, this does not have a colloquial definition because no one uses it outside of science and atheists. Literally, no one else uses it. There's no reason for anyone else. Well, statistics, but I include that in the sciences, right? No one else uses it. So there's not a colloquial definition. You can't go up to someone and say, like someone random who's just not interested in atheism or science or whatever, and say, what's a null hypothesis? And they'll be like, I don't know. It's literally, it's just a term that's been co-opted from science in order to make a rhetorical point. And for me, that's different to just someone like with the word delusion, or delusional, where there is like a more colloquial version of it, or psychotic, or psychopathic, or any of these kind of terms. Like, null hypothesis doesn't have that. It is only really a statistical term.
Yeah,
I think if you think about words, they act as kind of clothing. They're not just something we use to discuss, but they're something that we use to kind of portray a version of ourselves. So co-opting the null hypothesis kind of gives it the scientific veneer. So it adds a kind of scientific veneer to their own outlook. And it's used much in the same way that skeptic is used in a sort of aesthetic way.
Aesthetic skeptics, aesthetic scientists.
Yeah, kind of.
I can see that, but sorry, go on. Check.
So I was just going to say, like, we're talking about, finding that, trying to reach that middle ground with people. There are times when I recently, depends on my mood, but there are times when I'm just like, I can't even be bothered to try. I can't, an example, I brought it up on my phone actually. Someone in response to my article on misunderstanding the null hypothesis, which goes through and explains what a hypothesis is, what a null hypothesis is, how it's created, and that if you're using it to mean any other thing, you're actually changing the definition of both hypothesis and null hypothesis. And the response was, I disagree with the author. And I could have engaged in a bit of conversation, but I just went with, then you disagree with what a scientific hypothesis and the null hypothesis is within science. It's okay. Science denial seems pretty common on social media. And they said, thanks for condescendingly putting words in my mouth. And to be fair, that wasn't a nice response from me. I know it wasn't, right? So I'd been in loads of conversations about that time, and I'd spent a few days creating these articles and putting it out there and explaining where people were getting things wrong. And it was just like someone to read it and go, I just disagree with you. No explanation or anything like that. It made me just go, oh, well, fuck you too then, basically. So my next response was a bit better. I said, my apologies. I assumed you were disagreeing with the null hypothesis breakdown, as that is what you were originally inquiring about. The article does later address a couple of other things, so what is it you disagreed with? Someone else chimed in and said, I'm very familiar with the null hypothesis concept from statistics, and your take is correct, as in backing up the article. And they went, but we're talking about theology, not stats. You can't empirically prove the non-existence of anything. This must be the null hypothesis. Like, why must it be? Considering the null hypothesis is wholly to do with statistics and science, which is what you've just said as well, Luke, how can you say it must apply where it does not? Instead, you're doing what I mentioned in the article and redefining the null hypothesis and ignoring what a hypothesis is. It applies to theology as well. Right. Is it falsifiable? Does it have the ability to be operationalized? If not, then it isn't a hypothesis. It's just a claim or conjecture. Therefore, there is no null hypothesis. And, that's where that one ended. But there wasn't an attempt from me in the first instance to meet that middle bit. Usually I would try and meet that middle bit and bring them in. But do you know what? More often than not, that conversation would have gone the same way, even if I'd have started off with, a little bit calmer. Because they'd have followed that same path that they followed for the rest of it. it would have gone the same thing. They are very stuck in the, no, this is how it applies, and it means this other thing. It's like, you're using a self-created definition of it. It's not how it is applied in theology. It's not applied that way. It's not something that's used there. What you're doing is you're creating, or you've learned a colloquial definition that you think applies to theology because you've heard it from other people that have said it, and you've heard it going around, atheism is the null hypothesis. God doesn't exist is the null hypothesis. And you're stuck in that mindset. You've read an entire article that explains how it actually works and gone, yeah, I just disagree. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's something good there as well. Is you got the whole idea of the language game, where if you're not meeting them in their game or vice versa, you're probably misinterpreting the argument. But the argument then is over word choice. Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, you don't get to tell people how to use words. But behind every word choice, there is reasons for choosing that particular definition, that particular idea of it, using those specific terminologies. There's usually psychologies behind that as well. And I think there is good reason to argue word choices sometimes.
Definitely, I think there is, especially when you. Well, the point is clear and concise communication. At the end of the day, like making people understand you in the best way possible.
That's it. And if you're not meeting one another in each other's language game, you're not having that clear and effective communication. So the only thing you could be talking about is word choice. And like that, that it's important to discuss why, or, just what the reason for objecting to the word choice, what's the reason for agreeing to it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, most definitely. And there were a few questions there on Broken Off Threads, even in that was questioning that. No answers. Yeah. And that tends to be a lot the case. Like you get it with some people say, like the lack of belief definition of atheism is objectively better because more people use it. I mean, that's not necessarily true in itself, but even if it was, that doesn't necessarily make something objectively better. Okay, one of the purposes of language is to be easily understood, so that does have part of it that you can say is good. And I do think, there is something to be said for using the lack of belief definition to a degree when you're in a group of people that use that. I still think there is a better definition for a number of other reasons. Yes, okay, on the internet, at least on social media, in these debate groups and everything like that, the majority probably will use the lack of belief definition. Cool, that's one point in its favor. But then there's a number of other reasons why it's better to use the other one. You've got the semantic collapse, the special pleading, the fact that it's just so broad the term becomes useless. It can end up with people making conclusions like rocks are atheists and all of that sort of thing. There's a number of reasons why it's a shit definition and one reason why it's good. So if we're talking about all of these, I'd say it's objectively worse.
Yeah. And I think an issue I have is the interaction of words as well, not just single word usages, but like, let's say somebody uses the lack of belief definition.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. Happy with that. Then they go and call a theist deluded or say that they're delusional. Okay. And then you ask them, okay, so give me the evidence that God doesn't exist. And they're like, that's a stupid question. And I'm like, well, you've just called them delusional. You're saying that they are believing something in the face of enormous evidence against it. So what's the evidence? And then they don't provide anything. They just kind of par it off. And it's like, well, your own definition of your thing prevents you from actually saying that this person is delusional, or the way that you're using it, because you're saying, I don't need to have any evidence. It's just a null hypothesis, whatever they say. So it's not just about, this whole language thing is not just about individual words or how people define individual words. It's how they use those words interactively with other words and other phrases and stuff. And then they end up in these weird kind of, they end up on the ropes for no reason, just because they're like kind of not willing to give.
And they get really angry about it as well in these conversations, and then they just start projecting, oh yeah, you're an idiot, you've lost, blah 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 blah. It can be incredibly frustrating in those sorts of conversations.
And sorry,
no, go for it.
The conversation I was having earlier, just to bring it back to that, obviously, because
I recognise that's what you were talking about anyway.
yeah. I mean, I've seen it before. That's happened multiple times. I know Dave's used that argument before, and it's ended in the same way. So, the reason I know that is because I watched my video on mental health recently, and he says that happened to him. So, the other thing that happened after that was he went, "It's a stupid question," and then I said something else, and then he said, something along the lines of, do you believe in flurballs or something? And like, to a atheist, that's a really like kind of like, they'll have to say, well, I don't have any evidence for the existence of flurballs, so I don't believe they exist, but I also don't believe they don't exist, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I just asked him a simple question after. I said, did you just make up flurballs? And then if he says yes, I can say, well, I believe they don't exist then.
yeah, that's one of the best ways to argue it.
But he didn't answer my question right, after I asked it, because he knew, because then he's in a thing. Because if he says he just made them up, then I can say, well, I don't believe they exist.
Well, here's the way a kind of language game comes in handy. From the argument that was going on, you can see that the reason he was asking the question was to try and trick you into an answer. So just from his intent alone, you can say that you don't believe they exist, because he must have made them up.
Yeah.
Just as like extra support for the argument.
Yeah.
It's it's another one of those things though, like you're talking about the interaction between the words. It's something you notice people often do, is that all they're doing is arguing the last tweet that you've made, and I'm going to prove that one wrong, I'm going to prove that one wrong, I'm going to prove that one wrong, and they don't care about the interaction. And like you mentioned, with the delusional one, their definition is believing something in the face of evidence,
believing something false as well. That's a popular one, where it's just believing something false.
And but going with in the face of evidence is, that would evidence that it's obviously a false belief. And you, like Luke said, what's the evidence? Or believing something in the face of a rational argument, and you go, well, what's your rational argument that gods don't exist? Again, that's stupid. And you're like, well, why? There's plenty of rational arguments for why gods don't exist. Did a massive post the other day for why, Yeah,
he could have answered that question really easily if he kind of like, that wouldn't have been a hard question to answer if he had any kind of, like, he could have used divine hiddenness, he could have used like problem of evil, he could have used anything. So he could have used what are the gaps, he could have just used like his own senses, or like his own experiences. That would have been evidence.
It could have just gone, naturalism entails atheism. like at the end of the day, I'd say that you'd need a bit more to do it, but I mean, I would say that naturalism does entail atheism. So unless you're going for some form of pantheism which isn't supernatural, but then
many that I've met don't actually make the jump to full naturalism, though. They only go as far as methodological naturalism, but they they don't know about naturalism because there could be things that we've not seen or figured out how to think. So the skepticism stops them going to full naturalism. So they can't make the argument naturalism entails atheism.
Fair. But, there's the big ones anyway that someone could bring up. I
mean, the naturalism entails atheism is better. So what they should do is drop the performative skepticism and just go with naturalism. Because most of their beliefs entail it anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it can be hard to break people out of their language game. Even if you can be sympathetic to their use and say, I can understand, it can have a place and all of that. But what you've got to understand is the impact of this term, regardless of your intentions and so on. But people, it's like they have a favorite game and they don't want to play it. Like one of those people who's addicted to Candy Crush. And you're like, but I've got a brand new gaming PC here that you can use.
Well, if you think of it in terms of many of them just want to win the argument or win the discussion, they'll pick out bits and pieces that have worked for them in the background, in the previous, and hold on to them and just stick them wherever possible. And that's why you find such a muddled argument system.
Doesn't work.
It does if you're arguing with people who just can't be bothered.
Yeah.
And you count that as like a winning the argument.
Yeah, I mean, come back to the whole pigeon chess thing. I suppose if you're only focusing on the low-hanging fruit and the people who, can't argue against that really crap rhetoric, then you always feel like you win. And I can understand that if they're so used to dealing with people that, can't think their way through these bits of rhetoric and find why it's wrong. When someone does turn around to them and go, well, think about it this way, I can understand why they're angry. Because, if we're honest, it doesn't matter how much we say we want to know we're wrong, someone still pointing that out can be upsetting at times. It can make you shrink back into yourself and feel a bit shit. And it's easier to get that sort of critique from people you have a good rapport with. And it is. And it is, because then you don't feel quite so, well, who the fuck are you? Because you're like, I trust you, I respect you, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, I think sunk costs has a lot to answer for in that area as well. People, especially, people, and this is something I think we're aware of, but maybe, I don't know if we pay attention to it or not, because I think we tend to, debate people at face value a lot of the time with this in the back of our heads. But people in America who have been in evangelical churches, who have given up their faith and given up a lot of their relationships and stuff, who have joined a community where this is the rhetoric, this is how things are, these are the arguments we use, and it all makes sense, and the thinking's been done for you, essentially, and they pick up everything, but they don't look too deeply into it because it all does seem to make sense on the surface, and I admit that as well. Then when they're challenged, they've just invested all of their time and effort into this group of people who are now being shown to be wrong. They're not budging on it. So are they going to lose everything again just because, suddenly someone's coming out with that they're wrong? I think that they probably just spent loads of time like building themselves back up and giving themselves a new identity in that area. And now it's just like, I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Especially, bigger Twitterers, like, I think Shannon Q is brilliant for this, actually. She does consider, like, when she watched our null hypothesis video, she was commenting saying, oh, I understand, like, oh, so it needs to be operationalizable and stuff like that. But I think some others, it's like they have so many followers that are invested in their thing and like certain sound bites and stuff that if they give them up, then
Yeah, they're worried about if the more worried about the dollar that's coming in than correcting a bad belief.
Or even just the validation, even if it's not even money, it could just be the validation that they're receiving. We like you now that you're an atheist. We like that type of atheist you are.
Showered with adulation, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dave, was there much more we needed to cover from a language game perspective on this?
No, just that what we've been discussing now can be applied to, like, Luke says. Sorry, bit of a stone moment there. Like Luke says, words have impact and stuff. So it's actually kind of worth arguing in those kind of language games. And you can use this kind of language game thing, like we said before, to kind of argue any word, and you can kind of figure out whether you're actually just arguing about the term, whether you're arguing about definitions. And there's ways to actually argue for particular definitions. I go into more detail in my article. I'll probably finish that this weekend.
Awesome. Yeah, then that should be coming out soon, shouldn't it? So, Luke, was there anything you've got coming up?
Oh, well, so next Monday, we're just at Thursday today, aren't we?
Yeah, so not Monday.
Yeah,
Monday
not
after
Monday,
next.
the Monday after. Yeah. I will be having a stream on Psych Ed, 7:30 till 9ish. I have a mouse now, so it will start on time, hopefully. And yeah, I'm not sure what it's going to be about, so I'm open to offers on that. If you want to, if you have any interest specifically let me know on Twitter. I can't guarantee I will do the thing that you ask, because a lot of people ask for very technical, specific concepts that I'm not totally au fait, and I certainly can't do a whole stream on. So I tend to do what I'm comfortable with. So give me your ideas, but I won't do them probably.
A couple. I like the idea of bystander effect.
That's a good one. Actually, it's a really good one.
And I'd like you to go through various personality disorders and the dark triad.
Oh yes, the dark triad would be good actually. That could be a full part thing, because I could go through narcissistic, psychopathic, Machiavellianism, and then do the dark triad as a whole.
All together, yeah. That'd be really, really interesting. So add them to the ClickUp, Luke, and then when you're lost for ideas, you can go, oh yeah, I'm going to do that one.
You're implying I'm organised.
No, that's why I'm telling you to do it.
You're implying I have the organisational ability to do it. When have I ever actually interacted with any of these organisational tools? And that's not through choice. I would rather do it, but I just don't.
Also, next Tuesday, we're going to be having a stream on the ethics of euthanasia and pet ownership. So, long before we ever did our first Fresh Air podcast, which was long before we ever did our first SciPhi stream, there was one episode of the Answers in Reason podcast. And that was with my friend, Dr. Ben Lord. He's a vet, and we discussed homeopathic vets and anti-vax owners. And, I was quite interested in arguing against a lot of pseudoscience at the time. So it was a very interesting conversation for me. But we're bringing it back to have a conversation about, obviously the ethics of euthanasia, starting with pets and seeing if maybe that same logic would still apply to humans, or if there is a significant difference, and also the ethics of pet ownership, especially speaking from both the owner and vet perspective, and looking at the whole issues with how expensive they are, for one, the sort of care that different types of pets need, and all of that, and just anything and everything in between all of that. I'm really looking forward to it. It's been a while since I've seen him. In fact, this year was the first time I'd seen him in a couple of years because of COVID. He'd moved up to Leeds, and then there was COVID. Then I'd moved to Bournemouth, and there was still COVID, and you know. So it's also a chance for me to hang out with my mate. But that's next Tuesday at 9 p.m. GMT. That's 4 p.m. Eastern, and I'm really looking forward to it. Although I will warn you, I've got my COVID jab number 4 in at midday that day. So if I'm even more scatty than usual, we know why. I'm sure I'll be fine though, because I didn't get any side effects off of the last 2. But you never know; it could be a different injection. I could be foobarred, so we'll see what happens. Guys, did you have anything else that you wanted to discuss tonight?
No, apart from there was a good discussion last night between Emerson Green and Dry Apologist about the problem of evil. Well, worth the watch.
Oh, awesome. I saw that come up. I'm sure I pressed set reminder, but clearly I didn't because I didn't get a notification. I did want to see that one. So yeah, awesome. Thank you for the reminder. There you go. I set reminder. Awesome. Well, then in that case,
wait, I have one more thing. Sorry.
Well, go on then.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you: is the Kalam valid?
Yes.
No.
I also had one more thing I wanted to discuss as well, Luke. What is psychology?
I'm trying to get you back, and then one up me.
But yeah, so obviously Tuesdays and Thursdays, every Tuesday and Thursday, 9 p.m. GMT for the live stream, and half hour before we might have some music, and every other Monday at 7 p.m. usually, but you know, depends if his mouse is working or not. You've got the Psych stream as well on Answers in Reason, and it's definitely worth checking out. But other than that, thank you, gents, for being here tonight. I've enjoyed the conversation. And
I have too. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And hopefully it's given you all something to reflect on with your language games, you know. And we may never achieve the point where we're trying to bring someone at least halfway to our language game or appreciate that there are 2 games going on. But maybe we should at least try and focus on their game and explain to them where their game sits. And then say, but in the context of this, in this game, you know, these are the rules. And I need to think about how I can approach this one better myself, because generally, I don't get someone to see the different game. Sometimes I do, but then are they just the sort of person that's generally more receptive to that sort of thing anyway? I don't know. But if any of you have any ideas about how to get someone who is unreceptive to understand a different language game than the one they're currently playing, please let me know. Let us know in the comments and we'll put them up in the future, because I'd definitely like to know, because I'm not good enough at that conversation yet, and I'd like to be better at it.
Neither am I. No, neither am I.
Yeah, I know what the problem is, got no clue how to solve it. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. You've been watching the SciPhi show. I'd just like to say, make sure you check out Luke's stream from Monday about distorted minds. Have yourselves an absolutely fantastic one. You've been watching the SciPhi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Luke.
Have a fantastic night, everybody.